Hey everyone, this is sort of a first impressions video for Divinity Original Sin 2 Definitive Edition. For transparency's sake, for anyone who might be picky about it, I say sort of because the truth is I did play all of the first act and some of the second years ago, before Baldur's Gate 3 had even entered early access, but never finished it. That being said, I didn't remember anything from Act 2 and only some very vague things about Act 1. So I think it is fair to call this first impression. I'll get into the reason for my revisit later. For people who want the gist of my thoughts now, here they are. Pros, fun combat mechanics and encounters that can get chaotic for better or for worse, but ultimately provide cool puzzle-like challenges either way. Character building in terms of both role-playing and combat is well done and satisfying, with the game making sure you really do feel good about the paths you take. The world feels vast with interesting things littered about. Each area is large because it needs to be and not because they wanted to make a large world and forced it to be. As for the cons, although it is open world, it really feels like you have to go to each subsection of a map in a particular order. Dialogue options can get limiting at times and sometimes even pointless. And unfortunately, the companion AI is buggy. With that out of the way, the rest of the video is going to contain some spoilers for Joy and the map that comes after escaping that island on the ship. I'm referring to those acts as Acts 1 and 2 respectively, but I don't know that they technically are, to be honest with you. Looking it up online would give me the easy answer, but I'm intentionally not doing that to avoid accidentally spoiling stuff for myself. So if I'm wrong, sorry. And please know what areas I'm referring to when I say Acts 1 and 2. Also, fair warning, I'm going to be talking about Baldur's Gate 3 a lot, given that the two games are quite similar, both from the same studio, and given how many people have played it, it'll be easier for me to get my points across by drawing comparisons with it. Another thing, I am using some of the gift back features in this playthrough. I know, cheater, but to be fair, it seems like some of these are quality of life modifications, like making your character walk faster out of combat, harmless, and I'm not using some of the more egregious options like the 8 AP one. I'm telling you all this so that you have the full picture of my second, but still fresh introduction to this game. So, why am I back? Simple, I wanted more Baldur's Gate. I'm what you might consider a casual or normie CRPG fan. Games like BG3 and Wasteland 3 that are pretty easy to pick up on are great. On the other hand, stuff like Pathfinder, Wrath of the Righteous. I mean, look, I have it in my Steam library, and I never refunded it because I'm determined to grasp the ropes of it one day, but that day is still ways down the road. Honestly, I just wanted Larian's game design specifically. I love Baldur's Gate 3 and its variations of D&D 5e, but I've played it so much that literally nothing about its story or world surprises me anymore. I feel like I know every path to take, what outcome each dialogue option leads to. Please don't test me on that, I'll probably fail. So what else? Higher difficulty? I have my golden die. Sure, I get it, Tavern Brawler Way of the Open Hand is OP and cheap. But come on, Monk was my favorite class even before that build gained popularity. So what else? I could play with new builds as the focus. But guys, I have an extremely bad case of Act 1 burnout. I think true fans will understand what I mean. And hey, I remembered that I had Original Sin 2 in my library and figured I should finally finish that game. Yes, before the hardcore fans get their pitchforks out, I do know that the two games are different and not interchangeable. But I'm sure you can understand me when I say that I look to it more for the Larian Studios touch. One thing that surprised me going in after I had completely forgotten most of the game was just how different the combat is compared to BG3. If you don't know, it uses the action point system, think Fallout 1 and 2, where movement and bonking enemies in the head both require the same limited resource that regenerates for each character per turn. For example, if a character doesn't move at all, they should be able to get multiple attacks or skills in, but if they spend all of their AP running across the arena, whereas in BG3 how far you can move is separate from how many times you can attack or use skills or spells. And there are other cool features like daggers allowing backstabbing, which are automatic critical hits, unmissable spells also comes to mind, and just a bunch of other details that I don't want to get too bogged down in something that's supposed to be a first impressions video. But one thing I have to point out and really jumped out at me is that combat in this game is very chaotic. Ground effects are everything and everywhere. BG3 had some of that to a limited extent, but in that game things like burning ground or oil or whatever were just other little effects that could maybe happen and possibly be something to play around. But here they almost feel like the core component to combat. They absolutely demand your attention. I honestly cannot recall a single encounter I had so far that didn't involve fire or poison puddles that I didn't have to play around because they are so reactive. A little teeny tiny spark touches all of that oil on the ground and suddenly everyone in combat is suddenly burning alive. So okay, maybe then I'll use my cleric Glosa to put it all out with rain, but now all of a sudden that fire is steam, and God forbid that water wasn't electrified because that would just make it into a storm cloud electrocuting everyone in it. I think another thing that adds to the chaos and what makes these effects so detrimental or helpful is that the encounters feel very focused, for lack of a better word. Characters and enemies are grouped closer together, and the general area of engagement is relatively small. There is no jumping in this game, and so gap closing or traversing across harmful ground effects requires some sort of skill or spell. A barrel in BG3 might make one corner of the encounter arena untraversable or harmful so long as there weren't other barrels or explosives around for chain reactions. But one barrel here is enough to drench most of the frontline combatants in acid. In the same vein, you can imagine how powerful AoE skills can be. All in all, encounters in BG3 feel like battles or skirmishes between a group of adventurers and small armies in a warfield. Whereas in Divinity, fights are more akin to back alley brawls or a deadly wrestling match in a ring. BG3 was my introduction to D&D. Of course, I knew about D&D, but I never knew how characters or any of the systems worked other than that dice were somehow involved. So the slow leveling, going great lengths of time before getting that next gear upgrade, all of that stuff that flew in the face of your usual video game RPG systems, took getting used to. But after 730 hours, that became my new usual. Classes deciding your proficiencies and what your main attribute should be? Of course, why not? Original Sin 2, however, is a lot more freeform. What I really appreciate is that there aren't classes. Not really. The class you choose in the character creation screen is a template, just like it says it is, so you can definitely choose whatever the hell you want. Of course, provided that those decisions are smart decisions and make some kind of sense. I don't know how viable going off the beaten path is in this game, but for newer players like me, I think you still want to build yourself and your companions with the RPG Holy Trinity in mind. You know, a tank, a healer, DPS, what have you. But things like your persuasion stat or your ability to lockpick is completely separate from your attributes. So if you want to build something that would be considered a bad face of the party in BG3, like for example, min-maxing ranger that doesn't really benefit from charisma other than for saving throws, you totally can. There are no attributes like that affect out-of-combat interactions to such a major effect, just relatively small ones like strong characters being able to lift heavier things and carry more stuff. Out-of-combat mechanics are separate and you get separate points to spend for those. I did notice that in persuasion dialogue checks though, that there are multiple variations of it, like a strength persuasion check, intelligence persuasion check, yada yada. But truth be told, I don't really know how those stats affect those checks. I just always click on the intelligence one because my character is focusing on that and call it a day. If someone knows, feel free to educate me. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, Original Sin 2 follows your traditional RPG character building philosophy, though I am fully aware that D&D is the true quote-unquote traditional system. I'm not saying one is better than the other though, because I really love how you build characters in BG3. Sometimes the limitations that the game system places on you can get you to get really creative. And making something completely bonkers by breaking those limits or by treading those limits meticulously well is part of the joy of creating builds in that game. But sometimes you want something that gives you that freedom right from the start without thinking too much. like Original Sin 2. In terms of character building in the other pure role-playing sense, the first thing that comes to mind is just how fun it is. In Baldur's Gate 3, your character tags, for example, Baldurian, human, fighter, yada yada, are decided by what your character's race and class, subclass, etc. are, plus some story decisions here and there. For example, like the one-eyed tag. But in Divinity, you can also start out with up to 2 additional tags you can choose to put on yourself. These are like your character backgrounds in BG3, such as Entertainer or Soldier, but those are more about how you can get your inspiration points. The tags here are much more impactful in my opinion because there are no inspiration points to even get, you just get more dialogue options. Like Jester, which you can imagine gives you more gesterly and humorous dialogue options, or something like Mystic, who is more ominous and spiritual. The extra dialogue options those unlock aren't just for flavor either. They can allow you to bypass obstacles or give you different persuasion options during conversations too. Also, not to harp on BG3 too much because, frankly, I love that game to death and it just does some things better than this game, but here, in terms of what race you choose and just general role-playing shenanigans, this game I feel like offers a little bit more. I chose to be an undead elf, and some of the undead dialogue options are simply amazing. For example, I got into a philosophical battle of wits with another talking skeleton that I dug out of a grave. And the guy was throwing me your usual cliche philosophical remarks, and all the undead options I chose were like, how the heck are we talking to each other if skeletons don't have voice boxes? Or, how are we able to move if we don't have muscles or tendons? And the guy blew up and died, because I filled him with too much existential dread. Also, I mentioned that my character is an undead elf, and elves in this game are very interesting in that they can taste flesh to see the memories of whoever they tasted. So you'll come across just chunks of a torso or a severed head lying around, and you can eat it for neat little memories. And sometimes, I really like this, those memories give insight into solving puzzles or warn you of future dangers, or occasionally even give you new skills or spells to use. I also noticed that I eventually got the hero tag while doing all of the quote-unquote good actions during my time in Fort Joy, and that gives you even more dialogue options to choose. These are like your good paladin choices, which I rarely pick because they tend to be a bit too self-righteous for my tastes, but it's still awesome to have those options. So I imagine that there probably is a villain tag as the counterpart. Anyway, I absolutely love how much this game throws at you in terms of roleplay that tie in neatly with the rest of the systems. But unfortunately, because the game does its roleplaying superbly well, the times it doesn't work really stand out. For example, it's not unusual to be presented with several, I'm talking like 6 or 7 dialogue options to choose from. And yes, I realize that most are just variations of yes or no, or, asking a question, but it's the way that your character can say those things that really matter. Role-playing. But there were the occasional moments when I was given only 1 or 2 options to choose from, and neither really sounded good in my head. This is such a nitpick, I know, but like I said, the game does this so well 90% of the time, so when it does happen, it's like an ugly scar. I mean, is this just a me thing? Do only I care about this? Anyway, there was this one time where I succeeded in a persuasion check hoping to bypass combat, but still ended up in a fight, which was weird, but okay, I thought. Maybe that persuasion check let me skip some pre-fight debuff or something, who knows. I then proceeded to fully wipe my party in that fight, and I had to reload. So I went back, repositioned myself to higher ground, and had my tanky companion do the talking to start combat again. So, he can start out closer to the enemy. As expected, because he didn't have any of his persuasion stats up, he lost the persuasion check, but then I realized, wait, nothing changed. That check made no difference, so what was it for? I really wish that didn't happen, because now I'm constantly wondering about which persuasion checks actually matter. This, needless to say, is not a good thing. I know that most choices in video games are just illusions, but that illusion matters. And it was broken right at that moment. Ultimately, not a huge deal because honestly, something like that can be built back up over time, but Look, if I had to summarize its flaws with a metaphor or two, I would put it like this. This game is giving me an absolute buffet of role-playing greatness. I'm complaining that, I don't know, the potatoes can sometimes be a little undercooked. Or complaining that the soup at a gourmet Michelin star restaurant is a tiny bit too salty, which would otherwise trump anything else in the sea of mediocre chain restaurants that is the RPG genre. The game is open world in the same vein that BG3 is open world. Each major area is divided, but you are free to roam around and go wherever you wish. Sort of. More of that later. What struck me though is that each map feels gigantic. Not necessarily in sheer scope only. The world is absolutely littered with people to talk to or side quests to pick up, and believe me, I'm talking to everyone and interacting with everything, because that little reward I got from this quest or a book I read during my time completing said quest, that reward or that knowledge could very well become handy in another quest. Of course, I'm making it sound like every single little thing is that intertwined, and they're not, but a couple of times when it does happen, gives me the motivation to be that hoarder and completionist. For example, I was on my way to meet with a certain NPC friend at his old home and found a ring on the way. That same ring I used to convince a seemingly powerful sorcerer to not attack me instead of having to go through a persuasion check or two. Sure, intertwined quests are not new, and even a smaller sized game could do them without being open world, but my point is that this game was designed to be open world, and it does it so well. By giving ample room for interactions like that on top of all of the exploration to exist inside of it. I guess what I'm trying to say is that from what I've experienced so far, the game is open world because it needs to be. I call it open world loosely though because it's really a linear world in disguise. Subsections of the map are closed off by fake walls of enemies that might outlevel you, leaving you only one or two other places to go. And big deal, I originally thought. I can absolutely destroy enemies who are the same level as my party, so one level is no biggie. Turns out levels really matter in this game. Correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I've gathered, because of the way that you are allowed 2 points in main attributes and another in your quote-unquote class stats, like necromancy, etc., with each point being roughly plus 5% of a damage increase, one level multiplied by 4 to account for your full party? Let me do the math. Is a fuck ton of an increase. So yeah, there are occasions when I did come out on top in fights while being underleveled, but it's not a usual occurrence for a newbie like I am. So despite my praise for the world design, I'm sorry to say it really got on my nerves when I had to figure out where I was allowed to go instead of where I wanted to go. This is especially true where I am right now in Act 2. In fact, I think this was the main reason I burned out the very first time I played this game all those years ago. But if this game is anything like BG3, I think it should start getting better later on. As for how the game runs and if it's buggy or whatnot, I save this closer to the end of the video because it's honestly the most boring part in my opinion. I mean, it's an old game. It runs as it should, no hiccups. I did crash one time because for some reason choosing to add to wares with the right click menu on something that's inside of a container like a pouch that's also inside of your inventory crashes my game. But that's really nothing major. As for bugs though, oh boy. So let's get this out of the way. I haven't encountered any bugs per se, nothing game breaking, but pet AI needs some serious work. I don't know how many there are in this game, but I've run into one temporary pet, this void chicken, as part of a quest. And let me tell you, this thing is gone. I have no idea where it went. Before I lost it, it had a lot of trouble following me between instances from like room to room, but reloading the game usually fixed it. But now reloading does nothing. The quest is still in my journal, but the chicken is gone and I have no idea where it is. In this section, I just want to ramble on about little things that I like that I haven't mentioned before. First off, Lohse. I imagine she's everyone's favorite. I mean, I do like her as a character, but it's more that I find her story and her whole deal with the demon thing possessing her to be very interesting. I'm really interested in seeing how that plays out with her being a Godwoken. Speaking of Godwoken, I'm noticing a lot of similarities between this game's story so far and Baldur's Gate 3's story. Like starting out trapped in a ship, waking up on a beach, having some mysterious figure who is very cryptic and vague as all hell trying to get you to make certain decisions. And apparently those silent monks who are like the equivalent of the Tranquil in the Dragon Age series have worms in their brains, kind of like Mind Flayer parasites. You can even find jars of these worms here and there, like in BG3. Anyway, I'm wondering how much BG3's story was influenced by this game, considering they are both Balurian. But yeah, so far my character is trying to find people to learn about the source and the morality between certain decisions, while BG3's early act was more about finding a way to get the parasite out, so already there is some divergence. But we'll see. I'm not saying similarities are bad though, because frankly they're not. I just thought it was interesting and wanted to point that out. I should mention though that my party consists of Lohse, Beast, and Ifan, because judging solely by first appearances, those three seemed more like the type to get along with my character. Though believe me when I say that I was very interested in learning more about everybody. But this game only allows a party of 4s, and that's the extent of my willingness to manage people, so what can you do? Besides, I think everyone else is dead? I talked to their ghosts during the initial Lady Vengeance debacle, so the game pretty much locked in my choices for me. Which is weird, because I can still dismiss my party members and hire mercenaries. I have a theory of what might happen that allows me to freely shuffle my party around with origin characters again, but it's just a theory and I don't want to commit to the idea by saying it out loud. So far though, I really like my party. Ifan is an absolute bro, and I just really like Beast and his whole ordeal and his ideals. Lohse is cool and pretty adorable at times, and her whole nonchalant, humorous attitude is something I really enjoy. But something funny I have to mention is that there is one part during the Stone Garden Cemetery section in Act 2 at the tiny elven arena with the Elder Tree. I forget what they're called technically. She comments that the stuff there is just quote-unquote elven games, nobody cares. And I was so taken aback by that because my character is an undead elf. So I imagined my character calling out racist and yeeting her off the bridge. Also, Sir Laura, the talking squirrel knight that rides the undead cat, what a sentence. Love that little guy. I'm wondering if he was added in as a DLC at some point, or if he was always there. I can't tell because I have the definitive edition, so I don't know what's DLC and what isn't, because he seems a little bit out of place, but either way I'm glad he's there. At this part of the story, the most he's talked about are the delusional knights or something. I forget their name. Some sort of bad council of knights that want a great acorn to destroy everything. And yeah, I have an inkling of who those knights might be in the real in-game world. I say real, with quotes. Another cool thing I noticed was that this game shares a lot of the same voice actors as BG3. That was a pleasant surprise. The two that immediately come to mind, I don't know their names, sorry, are the voice behind Volo in BG3. He has this fantastic theatrical voice, very melodic too, that I recognized immediately. Actually, he might be the voice for Sir Laura too, I'm not sure. But he is definitely in other parts of the game for sure. Another one is Minthara's voice actress. She also voiced a lot of the goblins in that game, and she's here too, so that's nice. Anyway, I think that's it for me. Again, this was just my own opinions for what I've seen so far in Acts 1 and some of Act 2, so I'm expecting I'll have different opinions once I've gone through all of it. and maybe I'll do a more fully fledged review then. Anyway, thanks everyone, see ya.
These will take effect any moment now. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. Is that thanks enough? My potion's starting to work, Mabel.
Here we go. If I never see another
That's
again,
better.
it'll be too soon. Oh, hi! Nice to see you. Bye then. Are you regretting asking for my milk? That'll teach you to make assumptions.